She's not salty.
All right, let's go ahead. I got 4 o'clock. Like, I got like 2 hours. So, you got any questions about anything so far? I need you to be patient today. You just returned from the 5th level of hell.
So did I.
Anybody else had the flu? Or have you just been to, or have you been to Alabama where I used to
Financial
live?
aid office.
Financial aid office, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all the same.
Yeah, it's all the same.
I
Yeah.
have one and
It's okay, I was like working.
Okay.
It's hard to get here.
Dr. Katie, what do you got?
Lori.
Okay.
Okay. Mallory, when is breakfast with the experts?
The 7th.
It's 7. Okay.
Sorry, February.
February 7th.
Yeah, breakfast in the morning at 8. It's right. We don't know the location yet, so we'll be like posting flyers and we might put on the news feed and like that. But yeah, her
Point
name's
of-
Rhonda. Something.
Point of inquiry.
Yeah.
Yes. Point of
Oh,
inquiry.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday morning.
Okay.
We get breakfast.
There's a possibility. If I don't think my schedule is necessarily set in stone for my GA, to be quite honest. It's just kind of coming as it goes.
Yeah.
So if there's a chance that we just happen to not be able to make it to any of those, and we want to go for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
you know. What
So are
should
you
we
saying
do?
that you have a work commitment that would
Potentially. I mean, if it's on Wednesday,
so
thus far, it's all right. But I don't know if the schedule is actually set in
for
stone.
students who are online, there is an online D2L site. For students who are on ground who have work commitments that keep them from being able to come to breakfast with the experts in person, they should also send an email to
I can write that down for you.
HSMP Breakfast with the Experts, that link that I put in the newsfeed,
Okay.
and but make sure you do that.
All right.
And then you just like write like a 1-page summary over the video and submit
Okay,
it.
you have to-
Okay.
You have to watch it and then write a summary.
Right.
And there's a huge test to people.
And
Yeah, I'm the one who grades it.
the graphics.
It's like
Do you really grade it?
That's just my,
Anonymous.
So that's the only announcement I had.
Great.
Yeah, go.
anything else?
I filed my taxes.
Yay, Brenna.
Yay. Alright. Well,
Thank you.
we got actually, this doesn't, if you looked at some of the slides I put up, I actually put a new set of slides up about 3 o'clock. So those are the most current. I only replaced a couple because a couple of them were illegible. I tried getting started on reviewing this stuff last week and got the flu. And so I didn't get to spend any time at all. It was, I hate to whine about things, but like I told my wife, at one point everything hurt so bad it hurt to have the sheet on my toes. It was hurting. I was like, this is ridiculous. So I never have had the.
Flu shot this year?
I did. It's mandatory in the hospital to get flu shot.
Oh, that's true.
Yes, it is.
So I got a flu shot and then still got the flu, but you know,
Did you actually get it? You just get the symptoms?
I got the full on flu. So, and it's yeah. So I'm still breaking out in sweats occasionally just because I get overworked. So you'll see me sit down, and but you don't understand what I'm saying. Like I'm rambling more incoherently than I normally do. So just raise your hand and say I have no idea what you just said, and I'll say either do I. And, I do have, but I did go over most of the stuff. There weren't any big changes from previous years, except for some Affordable Care Act stuff. So I tried to update some of that and put a couple of. In past years, I've talked a little bit about a family, little tangent from my family. And so this year I actually did a little more research and pulled up some family information and showed you what had happened. It's kind of a neat, I think it's neat, but I'm old and, you know, got the great hair to show it. So when you get my age, you'll appreciate these things, okay? So anyway, so any questions about the stuff you read? Because I know everybody in here went through this chapter and just devoured it, right? Really exciting stuff. Anybody in here just love all the history behind it and going to remember every one of the dates that's in here? All of them. That's what I wanted to hear. You're going to remember all of them. I remember all of them if I look at my notes, okay? So just know that the important stuff is understanding the concepts. You'll probably want to focus on a few things like, when Medicare came to be, Social Security Acts that formed Medicare and Medicaid, what gave us the opportunity to have Medicaid. Some of the other little things that occurred, and we'll talk about those in detail, so don't worry. So just to give a little bit of an objective, we are going to talk about what shaped our delivery system. First thing I want to go ahead and throw out of your vocabulary is this idea of a system. We do not have a system, okay? We don't have a system. It is what it is. From this grouping of payer sources and providers, we've pretty much developed some of the best research in healthcare in the world. We've had some pretty incredible advances. A lot of the things that have come have been because of the way that have come to pass have happened because of the way the United States developed this so-called system, okay? So I know we preach about the negatives of how the United States doesn't have a system and how gosh, there are so many other systems in the world further advanced. We blow all this money. That's what we do as Americans. We blow money. I mean, any of you looked at your bank accounts lately and accounted for every dime? We blow money, don't we? We blow money. I mean, we are the poorest rich people I have ever seen, okay? Having lived abroad for a few years and traveled the world, I know I mentioned last week that I've traveled all through Central and South America. Those are really poor people. They would die to be poor like us, okay? Many situations, they would just love to be poor like us. So when you complain about, gosh, I don't have any cereal in the house. Imagine not having cereal and not knowing what it is, and not knowing when your next meal is. That's true first world problems that we have, right? So I don't have a lot of sympathy when I start hearing people complain about how they don't have money for their vacation. Well, that's great. That's tough. Sorry, you don't get to go to the Bahamas this year. It's tough. We have a lot of opportunity in this country, and you can pretty much have the opportunities that you want if you don't make up the excuses to not get them. So, but I'm going to give you some historical background on everything. Okay, we're going to talk about the bills that were passed. We're going to talk about the development of the hospital. We're going to talk about how corporations played a role, how they have had some really poor influences and how they've had some really great influences. And we're going to look at what brought us back to the Affordable Care Act, okay? And where we are today. So I actually, for some reason, when I updated this slide, it took me back to the original slide. I will say this, that there are certain conditions that will make national health care reality. Does anybody can think of any of those off the top of their head? We're going to talk about them later, so there's no pressure in that question. But what do you think? I want you to start thinking about what conditions could make a national health care reality in the United States. Okay. Totally get it. Trust me. If anybody in this room gets it, I get it.
This is just normal.
That's
normal.
At least once a class.
Perfect. Good.
I'm allergic to
I hope this is not once a class. Right? But a lot of it has to do with our beliefs and values, how they've transformed and how they continue to transform based on a lot of things that are occurring with population and education. And why we have not made that jump yet, okay? So in 2010, they passed the Affordable Care Act, didn't have broad consensus, and it's been, how many years? 8 years now, right? So we're looking at 8 years down the road, and a lot of things have not materialized, which may have led to the election of Donald Trump. So whether good or bad, whichever way you look at it, changes occurred, and changes are continuing to occur because of lack of consensus. Okay, I mean that's just where we are, lack of consensus. So you're going to hear me cough constantly. So think of some technology. When you think of technology in healthcare, what are the first things that pop in your head?
Electronic health records.
What was that?
Electronic health records.
Yeah, electronic health record.
Like telemedicine.
Telemedicine, okay. There's a bunch of stuff. Name it, it's out there.
MRI?
MRI, okay.
All of clinical engineering.
That's great. So it's really interesting that we look at what we look at as technology, right? We're looking at electronics, right? That's the immediate thought. But if you go back into the 1800s, 1700s and 1600s, technology was just medicine as a whole. Development of new medicine, that became technology. Treatment, like clinical treatment, became technology. The usage of certain utensils. Think about just the act of hand washing. That was technology. Think of, I've been accused by coming back to work too early of being Typhoid Mary, right? What do we know about Typhoid Mary? Anything?
She was a carrier, but she didn't know it. So she infected.
I know I'm a carrier, right? By the way, I'm not a carrier anymore, just so you know. I've been
Pregnant lady here.
fever-free. And that was my first thought, by the way, because Thursday night, I got home, I was feeling fine, and Friday night, I go out with my wife, and after dinner, I'm like, did I eat something? Am I feeling really great? And I had a headache earlier that day, really bad one, and I was like, well, I had a little cough. I was like, okay, this is weird. By 4 o'clock the next morning, I was on fire. So the first thought was, oh man, Kate's gonna kill me if she gets sick. So,
Don't worry, I already got the stomach flu.
I'm sorry about that, but you can keep that. I don't want that.
But
So-
if you do pick, you might learn about Typhoid Mary this week, because that's one of the possible interesting history.
Mm-hmm. So be thinking about these things. These are technology. The discovery, as we discover things and we implement changes based on those discoveries, that is technology. Okay? So don't just pigeonhole yourself into this thought that it has to be electronic. Now we are blessed with all these great things. I mean, electronic health record. I have worked in the world of both electronic and paper for the last 10 years of my life. I have gone from a system where we were all paper to a system, moved into an electronic world, then gone to another location where we were all electronic. None of the nurses had ever charted off of an electronic record, and moved that group of people into a paper chart, because the company that we merged with was not on electronic health records yet. And they were planning on it, but it was until the March following year. So had a 5-month period where all of a sudden you have nurses and doctors literally who have never charted on paper. And I will tell you of the nightmare it is from a risk perspective to document in a paper chart. It is the worst thing ever, okay? You can't read people's handwriting. There are prescriptions that are look-alike, they sound alike, can cause all kinds of medical errors. Electronic health record is the safest, and it literally is more secure. We know of all the data theft that can go on. The only data theft that truly occurs, that has occurred so far, is because of personal choice. It's very rare that something is left out there for people to see that would expose a patient, because the way electronic health records are set up, there's limited data on the screen at a time. You would have to exactly know what you were doing traveling through the medical record in order to find information. You would have to mine the data truly mine the data. So that's one of my jobs, by the way, as risk director at a hospital, is to go through and, I mean, I do literal walks. I walk through the hospital. I'm looking at people's monitors. I'm looking for stupid things like where they printed off a record and stuck it in a box under their desk to shred later. It's the biggest pet peeve in the world. And I'll go through and I'll watch somebody go through their chart. You know, if they leave something up in the hallway, I give them a fine. So, yes.
So if you do see like either like a medical record number or a social security number that's in a box, what do you do besides find them?
So it depends. Depends on the circumstance. Depends on if it's an employee who needs access, if they're leaving it up for others to see. Most of the time, in fact, on our medical record, the last 3 that I've used, the social security number is never there with the medical record number and full name. You literally have to go in through a demographic tab and then go back to a social security, a personal information tab to be able to piece the 2 together.
The hospital that I worked at in Dallas, we had that all the time.
Really?
But we had, first name, last name, telephone number, address, MRN, and social security number.
Wow.
And when we would do EOC rounds, environmental care rounds, it would just be on their desk or in their recycling. And they're just like, no, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, no, we can, you know, we tell people I resort to obviously the worst case would be you lose your job. But not had to go down that road yet with any of it because we were pretty selective about the type of health record. Now there are some bad health records out there. People go on the cheap, especially when they look at big systems and they realize it's going to cost them $2.5 million to implement for a small segment of their system. You know, I mean, they're very expensive. That's why those who got on board early on, who got the rebate from the federal government through the Affordable Care Act, cashed in. It was a great opportunity, but so many people were scared about what was out there. What do I buy into? Do I need this? Do I really need this? Are we going to share data like we're talking? Nobody shares data. I mean, think about it. You're going to share across hospital systems. We're competitors. It sounded great. A lot of these things sounded great, but when it really came down to proprietary information, I'm not going to share that. And then we scared the American people half to death. How many people in the United States want to share their data with other people? We're all scared to death of sharing our information, except we'll log into everything on Facebook, right? We use Facebook that's got every password we ever own, right? We don't mind doing that, which is crazy. But we don't mind sharing data unless we say, oh, it's our health information. Heaven forbid we should share that with another physician, right? That can make an important decision for us. So what's our view of practice of medicine? It changes when we think about how our medical practices in the United States. We consider physicians to be the experts, right? We go to a physician for a reason. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then some things that have occurred over time is that physicians, while we want them to be on their own, they have become part of a corporate structure now. And managed care now employs a lot of physicians. So when you think about your insurance company, physicians are hired by those insurance companies to make decisions about your care without ever seeing you. And so they make decisions on your behalf. So we'll talk a lot about that. So just to give you an idea of some of the chaos that's involved in our system and how things, for example, like with ICD-10, the implementation of ICD-10 took forever. It was delayed forever. Everybody know what ICD-10 is? Anyone not know? It's okay not to know. That's what most hospitals use for coding, right? So you want to get paid? ICD-10, okay? So understanding how to code those little details has become very important. Most hospitals have implemented what they call a prospective payment system department. I oversee that department in our hospital. And what these individuals are required to do is look at a patient's chart, understand that is a big bag of potato chips. I could have used that yesterday. I was like dying for salt. Sorry. Tangents. I do this. Get used to it. So, where was I? No, we have a whole department. And their job is to look at the lines of documentation within a patient's chart and ensure that the diagnosis that they were admitted on meets what we're documenting, so that at the end of the stay, we can get paid for that stay, right? There's lots of little things that can go wrong, you know. We can have, you know, there are all these audits we do. We would do a preemptive RAC audit, which, anybody heard of RAC audits? It's basically where the federal government goes through and they basically look at your medical record, a specific record, and then either approve or deny payment based on little technical aspects. So you have a doctor who forgets to sign off on an order, or you have a team conference within a rehab hospital and you have a therapist who attends the conference and doesn't sign in. So something as simple as just not signing in, they'll deny a $32,000 stay based on that because they didn't meet the criteria that the federal government established. So seems a little rotten, right? Somebody stays in your hospital for 2 weeks and you don't get paid for it because somebody forgot to sign one little piece of documentation on time. They may go back and sign it, but if they don't get it within the 96-hour period or the 72-hour period that the requirement says, you're out of luck, right? So you have to, it is established over time. We've established a lot of structure, right? We've put a lot of administrative costs in place because administration looks at this and goes, am I going to leave it up to a bunch of nurses and therapists and doctors to document correctly, or am I going to put a system in place to verify that they're doing the documentation correctly so that we can get paid? I'm going to put all those pieces in place, right? Because it's really important because I have to keep my doors open. Okay, so that's just ICD-10. We start looking at all of the incentive programs that were thrown out here. There's all these incentive programs that are put in place with Affordable Care Act, with receiving changes that occurred in regulatory compliance for Medicare. All of these things have been put into place just for repayment, okay? So it's become a big thing. And now I'm going to show you where we came from, okay? So think about medical practice in the 1700s. What's the first image that you get when you think of medical practice in the 1700s?
They did it
Bone
all.
saw.
Bone saw? What was that other one?
They did everything. They like pulled your teeth.
Yeah.
And,
You go to the barber, right? Go down for a shave, and he's going to also
pull your teeth.
bleed me out because I'm sick. I've got the flu. If I'd been living in the 1700s this week, I would have probably died from, you know, blood loss and weakness. Yeah, we laugh a little bit about it, but it's
Yeah.
probably pretty accurate, you know? So primarily in the 1700s, medicine was a trade. You wanted to be a doctor?
You were a doctor.
You're a doctor. There's your stamp, right? You come home after school one day and say, Mom, I'm a doctor. How awesome is that, right? Everybody in here is a doctor today. Could you do that? No, of course not. You can't do that now. Why? What's changed? Regulations, right? We kind of started to learn a few things. Realized that there had to be somebody that was held responsible. There needed to be certain things put in place. What about some of these criminal medical procedures? We talked about, you know, bleeding someone. In fact, the book talks about George Washington may have died as a result of this because he had dealt with a chronic sore throat and some other issues. Can you imagine?
Didn't they give them some like mercury or lead
Yeah.
or something to that effect?
You get mercury, strychnine, all these poisons that they thought had a purpose, right?
Didn't he have wooden teeth?
Wooden teeth back then. Would you swap that for this now? You know?
Like termites in my mouth.
Yeah, termites in your mouth.
It'd be a good system.
I've seen some of those people locally. So, there, those things all happen. Think about it. Imagine. I think about this. I think about my grandfather. Okay, so grandfather was born in 1910, and he's not alive anymore. But he remembered his first automobile. He remembered seeing his first airplane. Okay, and so they lived in a small town in Georgia, and he said that you got sick, you're on your own. His mom would take care of him. That was it. His grandmother, who had been alive the longest, she was the one that knew all the stuff about doctoring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she would come over and she would help take care of the kid, and that's how they got better. Back then, one of my favorite things is hearing about is we didn't have did anybody have vaccinations back then? Of course not. That's new tech, right? That became new tech, and so before vaccinations, one of my favorite memes said, "Sure, you'd like to go back to the days before vaccinations, back when people lived to the ripe old age of died in childbirth, right?" So it's not funny, but it's hilarious at the same time, right? Because it's how far we've come in 100 years, literally in 3 generations. Okay, that's pretty amazing. That is a fast turnaround. And so problems that they had was one thing varied from another, right? How many of you thought that you would go into a community and you'd have a really good set of rules for taking care of people? There wasn't any rules, right? Literally everywhere was basically like the wild, wild west of medicine. You just did what you thought would work. My grandfather's brother, I want to say, don't quote me, one of my family members. I'll show you my family tree here in a minute. True story, I'll show you my family. Part of it. One of his relatives, brother or cousin, had to have part of the bone removed. Okay, so we're thinking 1920 roughly. Okay, living in a rural area outside of Georgia. Now, outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta was pretty advanced for that time, but they couldn't get him to Atlanta. Okay, and so what do you think anesthesia was then?
Chloroform.
What was that?
Chloroform.
No, they used liquor. Okay, this is the 1900s. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? This is not the 1800s. We're not talking Little House on the Prairie here, right? We're talking 1900s. I was born in the 1900s. I was like, that's scary.
So were we.
Yeah.
I know, but I was like, yeah, you were. I know that.
Give it a few more years.
Yeah, I have had a few more years. Yeah. So. But it's funny though. In our century, people were using alcohol as an anesthesia and anesthetic. That's right. So yeah, you think about that. So how many of you want to go to those days? So I had ankle surgery back 6 or 7 years ago. They removed a bunch of bone fragments, stitched a couple of complete torn ligaments and a partial tear. And so it was a fun surgery, right? Do you think I wanted to be awake? They hand me a bottle of Jack Daniels and say, hang on tight, right? Nobody wants that, right? No, well, maybe a few of you might want that. But I don't want that, right? It doesn't sound like a sanitary environment. It doesn't sound like a safe environment. So we've come a long way, right? So what's wrong with the demand in the 1700s to early 1800s?
Your family took care of you, so
Okay.
you didn't need to go.
Think about, were there hospitals? There wasn't any real central location, right? What was America like in the 1700s? You have big bustling cities everywhere. It's a lot of farmland, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to get somewhere. Can you imagine I set myself up as a doctor, right? and I've got a town of maybe, 85 people. You think I'm gonna stay busy all year? I better have a second job or a third job, right? And when someone gets sick, that's why they're bartering out with chickens, right? That's how they do things. There's no HMOs, right? I'm not sitting here going, well, the town's got a sweet HMO. I just got to sit back and wait until somebody gets sick, and then I only have to treat them 22 times this month. I'm good. See? And then they have to pay out of pocket. It's not like that, right? How about the medical education in the 1700s? Wow, it was whatever you picked up and learned from your brother or your grandmother, right? Pretty much, yeah. And so you think about some of the stuff that may have occurred. You think you have, let's see, you got tailors. You imagine going and getting your pants fitted or your dress fitted
Hemmed.
or hemmed. I don't know these terms. Whatever. Okay. So you go get your dress hemmed. And at the same time, you have your teeth pulled.
All right.
Okay? Does it sound legitimate? By today's standards, absolutely not, right? Unless you think of Walmart, and you can go to Walmart and get your medicine, and you go to the bank on the way out, and
And your haircut.
and get a haircut while
And
you're
eye doctor.
and your eye doctor. Yeah.
Maybe the cars working.
See, they thought of it all, right? So it's returning to the 1700s every time you walk in. I want you to remember this analogy, okay? This is why I put so much emphasis on your essays, because I know you can think of all these things. There's tons of examples of how things have changed, okay? But medical education in the 1700s to 1800s was non-existent, okay? Non-existent. It was whatever you could pick up. All right, so we're looking at 1800s to mid-1900s. When we think of, let's just think about the idea of the American physician. So we started off, you remember reading the book about almshouses? So what are almshouses? So basically, it's a location that takes care of people who are completely indigent, and the community throws resources at it. Nobody's required to, but it's whatever people decide to give to charity, they're taken care of at those locations. Now, these aren't people that are necessarily sick, but some of these almshouses might have a room where they put sick people. Sometimes they would move those people to a specific location in town to take care of. If you were sick and you had a chronic illness or disease, you know what kind of location they would put you in and what those are called. Do you remember what those are called? Call them pest houses. Okay? So the interesting thing about a lot of these pest houses is you weren't categorized by the type of illness that you have. You're in there with you may have some chronic illness and you're right next to another person who has TB and another person who has, whatever. And if your family can't take care of you, that's where you go. And many of these places, and early practices were that they felt like they needed fresh air, so in the middle of the winter time, they keep windows open. They were not sanitary environments. Sanitation was not what you would consider a high priority, right? My dad's a big history buff. He's got tons and tons of history books, and he always talks about if he had a time machine, he would go back in time and teach the Revolutionary soldiers about hand washing, boiling their water, and reusing dirty surgical items during war. Most of those who died during those times, during the war, even all the way up through the Civil War, most of those that died from, not from the war itself, but from infection, from injuries. In fact, my great-grandfather, Dawson Phelps Sloan, he died later on in life. He got shot in the Civil War and then died from that bullet wound like 20 years later. carried the bullet with him for 20 years and finally died from complications from it. I mean, think about that kind of stuff, right? Would that even be acceptable today? So you're walking through Chicago, right? Because that's probably the most commonplace, right? I have two brothers in the FBI, and one of them had to go to Chicago last year for Chicago reasons, and he's like, it's nuts. But he says, so that's my analogy. You're walking through Chicago, you get shot, you think, I'll be all right. You don't do that now, right? You think, I've been shot, I gotta go to the hospital. Okay, so the point is, we know better now, right? Back then, it's like, well, I'm gonna have to live with this. You know, if I can keep my leg, I'll keep my leg, type thing. Now we think there's no reason that I shouldn't return to full life if I can get to the hospital quick enough and then stop bleeding. Okay, urbanization. So we talked about how spread out everything was. You know, think of the whole idea behind being in a village. If you're if you're in a large populated area, all of a sudden there's more sick people. Trying to take care of them in a specific location just makes more sense, doesn't it? So around 1880, the first hospital started to pop up. And basically it was just a group of physicians who decided to pool resources on those and said, hey, we can work better here and people can come to us. We don't have to go do the house call anymore. There's so much of them out there that they just come to us. We try to handle what we can, right? And so hospitals start to develop a little bit better and come into practice. Some of the other locations, you know, how did we deal with mental health in the 1800s? Did we deal with it?
Went to an asylum.
Yeah, an asylum. So imagine you deal with chronic depression, and so your family doesn't know how to help you because it's the 1800s. They put you in an asylum. Same location where they deal with people who are dealing with chronic types of psychoses. Just imagine. That's considered insane by today's standards, isn't it? We would never do that. Now we've developed medications that help us cope with these things. People that have severe problems, severe cases of even schizophrenia that have multiple diagnoses within it. Even they receive home treatment now. Okay, so if you start thinking about the states began to run their own mental asylums. Okay, so it was just a central location for those who dealt with mental illness. I'm not asking for a show of hands, but I think everybody in this room can think of someone who deals with depression or some type of mental illness, and it's a real thing. But there's help, right? It's not like 1800s here. Okay, we still have a long way to go. In my opinion, I throw a lot of these out there. I mean, it's one of the least attended to areas by medicine because there's just not been the funds there. There's never been a big push by the federal government to get involved into mental care. Let's see. What about dispensaries in the 1800s? What's a dispensary? Every now and then you'll see some location that actually uses that name still in their advertising. So it's like a pharmacy, right? Mm-hmm. And originally they were where they would develop their own little concoctions, right? They would take a few things, some of them would be with herbal medicines, others with medicines that were proven to work, and they would develop their own medications out of that. But the dispensaries were usually, once they became fully functional and were looked at as an actual location for aid, were usually run by new physicians, and they would give basic medical care and then dispense medications along with that medical care. Okay, so pretty interesting idea when you consider that 50 years prior, you know, even 100 years prior, people were going to their tailor and having their dresses hemmed, thank you, and getting their teeth pulled, right? So it's a big change. So I'm showing you part of my family tree here. I'm good, you can't read all these crazy names. But if you go back, so this would be me right over here, me and my wife, and these are all, not all, because it keeps going up a little bit more. My brothers, my sisters, there's 7 of us. Yeah, I'm the 5th of 7. And so, and that's my dad. He has the world's worst name, and he's a junior, Earlton Barber.
Oh.
I'm so glad I'm not a 3rd, right? Earlton Barber, B-A-R-B-O-U-R. It's a family name.
So people call him Earl?
No, they call him Red because he's got red hair. So,
My apologies.
where would you even come up with Earl? Come on.
No, we call him John.
Exactly.
My bad.
Yeah. What's funny is my grandfather, Earlton Barber Sr., his real name is Robert Earlton Barber Youngblood Sr., but he thought it was too long, so he got rid of the Robert. Of all names, exactly what we say every time we think about it. My dad says he had one good name and he got rid of it. So, anyway, so you go back a few years, and this guy right here, Edward Foltz Knott, he lived in he was born in 1813. The only reason I show you this is we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, basically 6 generations. And this was the old medical college in Griffin, Georgia that he started. I actually found a photo. So, had to go on Google Earth to find the photo of it. It's still there. It was built in 1850. He built it, and this is kind of some background on it. So it was incorporated by Georgia legislature in 1859 and given power to grant degrees and licenses to students of medicine and surgery. Seems really, really impressive, right? Mm-hmm. Except it's in 1859, right? So Dr. E.F. Knott's primary school is what it was. Primary medical school. See how long it lasted. The house was remodeled in 1860, indicating the success of the school, but because of unpaid carpentry, there was a lien placed on it in 1861, and it was sold in a sheriff's sale in 1866. Okay? And then in 73, it was turned into a hotel. And in 1906, it was renamed the Southern Hotel. Pretty awesome, right?
How many graduates do you have any idea?
I have no idea. I was
open for very long.
Not very, very long, right? But it was given by the Georgia legislature power to give degrees and licenses in medicine and surgery. So, pretty funny stuff when you consider the fact that there was this progression. Even in 1859, there was a progression leading to saying that we need to do something. We need to have some type of licensure because we don't know how to say that our doctors are legitimate doctors. Evidently, probably what happened is you had some member of the legislature who got really sick and went to his barber to get fixed up, and he died. And so some other friends in the legislature said, we got to do something about this. We're losing all the votes. And so didn't last long. Any ideas why this probably didn't last long? How long do you think it used to take for someone to go through and get medical licenses.
Couple years.
Couple years, okay. In the 1850s, you think? Couple years?
Couple months.
Probably more likely, yeah. A few months.
It's a drive-through medical school.
Basically, drive through. You got your horse and carriage. You come up. Yeah, I mean, it didn't take long. What was that?
You didn't even get off the carriage.
Probably not. Probably not. So, pretty crazy to think about. In a few months, you spent more time in kindergarten than these guys did in, you napped for half of your kindergarten, right? So, than these guys did for medical school.
And was it expensive?
I don't know. Probably by their standards at that point, it was probably an expense. Probably not everyone was able to do it. You think about one of the main things that occurred during that time was a lot of clergy and those who were well off would send their kids to these type of schools. The changes that occurred, that continue to occur, were, the biggest transformation in education came through the who was that? Mayo Clinic. Let's see. No, I'm losing my mind. I've been reading Mayo Clinic stuff all day long today. The Harvard Medical School, right? What did Harvard say? Anybody remember? They went from saying that their academic year was going to no longer be like 4 months. They said we're going to expand it to 9 months out of the year. Can you imagine if you only had to go 4 months out of the year? Yeah. And then their undergraduate education was 2 years. They expanded to 3 years. That was pretty remarkable to say, okay, now our medical education, if you come here for medical school, you're going to be required to go for 9 months, and you're going to have to go for 3 years. But it wasn't a graduate degree at that time. So think about it. You could have all been doctors. You've been done by now. You could have saved, even by that standard, you could have saved yourself a year. No 4 years. So then Johns Hopkins came along and set the standard, right? Their medical school came along and they said, here's what we're going to do. Not only are we going to have this become not only are we going to say that you have to have a college degree before coming here, this is going to be a true graduate program, okay? So by making it a graduate program, it raised the bar tremendously. And along with that, they said, okay, we're gonna establish fixed labs. We're gonna have real laboratories where students can come in and work with cadavers, work with the tools of the trade. And then we're going to have full-time employees, full-time professors that are going to teach specific sciences. They're going to be their specific job, is to teach about this subject here. Before that, you may have gone in and spent 2 years with one professor and learned about everything, right? Tangent. When I was in 5th grade, we moved to a town way out in northwest Georgia. It was such a small town that when my family and I moved in, the mayor, she came to our house to introduce herself to us and welcomed us to the town because she knew everybody in the town, and she knew that based on the previous census, it was the first time that town had ever been over 800 people. We finally pushed them over 800 with our family of 9. Yes, we were famous.
Wicked Redwoods everywhere.
That was the craziest thing. Menlo, Georgia. It's not a lot bigger, but it's bigger now. But Menlo, Georgia, it's probably 1,100 people now. It's got a 4-way stop. It had a traffic light, but some Atlanta attorney came through and ran the traffic light and sued the town because some statute in the state of Georgia says that if your town is not over a certain population, you're not allowed to have a traffic light. And they actually had to absolve their police department they now have what they call Menlo security. That's true story. Yeah. Yeah. Small town.
Somebody ran the lights,
Yeah.
then sued them.
Sued them. Yep. True story.
Savage.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so small town. And when we moved there, I was in 5th grade. Finished 5th grade, went in 6th grade. I'm used to living in Rome, Georgia. I'm getting used to this tiny town. You know, Rome's got 75,000 people. So compared to that to this, I felt like I had gone back 30 years, right? And I had the same teacher and had all the same kids in my class. And then they just moved another set of 5th graders and they're with us. It was the weirdest thing. So that's what it feels like every time I think of this type of thing, of having the same teacher year after year. It wasn't because I was like, did I fail? Mom, Dad, am I stupid? You know, I was like, what did I do? You know, and no, you're in 6th grade now. You have the same desk and you have the same teacher. It's the craziest thing. I told you I'd go on these tangents. All right, so if we look at patient dependency that developed in the 18 and 1900s as a result of some of this education reform and led to education reform, what is patient dependency? Talked about it a little bit earlier, about 4 tangents ago.
If you're sick, then you're going to rely on the doctor instead of your family to help you out.
Okay, so yeah, that's part of it. And that's, if you think about when you go to the doctor, what's kind of your expectation?
I'm looking out for your best interests.
Yeah, they're looking out for you. They're the expert, right? That's why I came to them. If I didn't think they knew something more than I did, I wouldn't go to them, right? They're going to give me a plan on how to get better, right? So there's 3 parts of dependency. Okay, it's in your book, page 106, bottom left corner, if you want to know. All right, first it's going to legitimize the person's sickness, right? They're going to go in, they talk to the doc. Doc says, "Yep, guess what? You're sick." And you're thinking, "Yeah, I know I was sick." You know. And the second, they're going to say, "Listen, you're sick. You really don't need to be at work. Okay, your job right now is to go away from work, school, whatever your obligation is. Go home and get better." Okay, all right. And then the third part is say, "Now here's how you're going to get better." That's how you're going to get better. Okay, that's what we're looking for, right? We're dependent upon that. We want to hear that. Is this still the same? Is this still what we look for? Yeah, right? I mean, I still go to the doctor for the same reason. I go in, I want to be able to tell my employer, first of all, listen, I am sick. And 2, they don't want me there. They tell me it's not a good idea for me to be there. And this is what they're telling me I got to do to get better. And this is how long it's going to take. So this is the dependency that we deal with. Let's see. So if we look at how are doctors, let's see, what's a good way to ask this? Not ask it, just say it, right? So when you're talking about a physician's autonomy, when we think of a doctor having autonomy, we want them to be free from influence, right? If, for example, when people check into the hospital, one of the patient's rights is to know whether or not we are participating or will have them involved in any type of experimentation. Now that sounds like a crazy thing, right? Oh my gosh, they're experimenting on it. But think about it. If you have a physician who is related to is involved in some type of patient study, and they are experimenting on patients without them knowing about it, be kind of important. Advise them of that. Do you think that there would be any bias involved? It could lead to bias, right? What types of bias do you think might occur if a physician can't act in an autonomous way?
Just to be told certain medication or give certain medication.
Yeah, medication's a big one, right?
Yeah.
So they might think about it. I'm a physician, and my 70% of my salary comes from GlaxoSmithKline.
Mhm.
You think, whose products am I going to use? Right? So that affiliation is kind of important to know about. And if I am involved in any type of experimentation, so say we are working on, you come to the hospital and you don't know that we're working on a clinical trial with some organization, you come in and our doctors say, oh, really need to prescribe this medication for you. Do you think that that will lead to good or bad news for you most of the time? Probably not going to be good, right? It takes patient choice away. It's a violation of a patient right. That's why that form is in there, by the way. If it's not in there when you check into a hospital, raise your hand and ask for it, okay? I doubt they're going to be experimenting on you, but you never know. But you wake up with 11 toes, I warned you, okay? Let's see. As a result of some of the pressures that were coming up, think about the development of some of the, for example, the AMA. Anybody know what the original purpose of the AMA was? American Medical Association, sorry. I hear lots of, just say it. And nothing, I'm not going to go, gosh, you're wrong.
They were just made to basically say who could be a physician and who couldn't. Is
Gosh,
that-
you're wrong. No, actually, that's right.
I was like, wrote it
I
in my
just
notes.
Googled this. I'm
No.
just kidding. No, that's they came together, okay, because they set a standard. Remember we talked about that development of standards. So think about where we've come, okay? Your barber and your tailor are your doctors, and then all of a sudden they're like, no, we're going to set up some medical colleges, and then you got the Knotts family out here in Griffin, Georgia, for a few years teaching people how to be doctors, right? And then find out that, gosh, Harvard is saying they're making this a college level thing now, and oh wait, now Johns Hopkins is saying you got to go to grad school for it. Why would we want our people here in Georgia going down to Knotts, family physician group to learn how to be doctors when I know that if I go, north and get a real education, I can be a real doctor, and people will really be well taken care of. People in my community, in my state, will be taken care of. All of a sudden, all of these mom and pop schools go away, right? Development of things like in the state of Georgia, Medical College, Georgia. All these requirements pop into place. American Medical Association develops, and they say, hey, these are the minimum standards. We think they should be there. And then all of a sudden the states and the counties really give them a good foothold because they're like, yeah, we want this to be the standard in our state because we know, that way if you go to a physician in the state of Tennessee, you're going to get at a minimum this type of education and they're going to have passed this type of board, okay? So, it becomes really helpful, right? Trying to think of. So think about those little mom and pop places too, right? And I want you to think about these big medical colleges that we consider big medical colleges now, right? Who hasn't heard of, Johns Hopkins Medical or Harvard Medical Nobody, right? Everybody's heard of these places. They're the premier locations still to go for medical school. And this all happened because of a free market. Okay? This is how this stuff developed. You went from basically, like I said, the wild, wild west of healthcare became and developed this structure because the Knotts family down there in Griffin, Georgia couldn't compete with this. Okay? Are you grateful that they couldn't compete, or would you rather go back to my great-great-great-great-grandfather and have him work on you, right? Sorry, Grandpa, I'm not going to see you. I'm going to go to my physician over here at State of Franklin and let them take care of me, right? All right. Specialization is developed, right? Because of this. And especially as hospitals became more and more central to the development of in healthcare, realized that a bunch of general practitioners in one location wasn't as helpful as if you had someone who really focused on the heart or lungs or eye or bones. My boss's brother is a cardiologist, and you ask him, what do I do about this? And he's always saying, no, this is my little window right here, okay? Don't ask me about anything outside of here. And that's what they're comfortable with. So specialization, has it hurt us or helped us? Totally an opinion question. Helped? Yeah, I think so. Now, is it the greatest thing in the world? Does any physician come out of, is it rare, do you think, for a physician to come out of school and say, I really just want to do general practice? It's pretty rare. And why do you think that is?
Because they won't ever make as much as the specialists. Well, and so then you run into a shortage of general med and geriatric docs.
So we've developed this system, right? We've got this huge system that really says, go get all this education, spend all these years in school, go become a specialist, spend all of those years becoming a specialist at this huge expense. And we're going to pay you this amount of money. And so you look at your return on investment, because that's what we do, right? We look at it and we go, how many in here looked at this, by the way, looked at your grad school and said, I'm going to go in debt for all this, and that way I can make $12.50 an hour. I don't think anybody in here did that, right? Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the thought, right? Why would I do that? Now, there may be a few who are like, I can do this, and I can really help a lot of people. But, that'd be great. But when the bank comes tapping on your door and says, hey, where's your payment? You're going to come up with payment, right? $12.50 an hour is just not going to cut it. So it's the same principle. You're not going to send this physician through 100 years of school at $500,000 in debt and say, oh, you're only going to make this much money, right? And so general practice is not as appealing, and especially in a rural setting, right? Because Medicare rates are compiled based on population. And so there are specific incentives that are in place for some rural areas, but sometimes those incentives don't outweigh the benefits. What are some of the benefits to an urban environment for a physician, for example?
All the people are close.
Okay, a lot of people close.
Or people in general.
Okay, and with more people comes what?
More money.
More money. And because of more money, what else is there?
More technology.
More technology. And so as a physician, it's easier for me to practice because I have more resources. I go to a rural area, have fewer people, I have fewer funds, I have fewer resources. It's much more difficult to practice medicine. Okay, so truly those guys that go work in rural areas, they learn to practice medicine. Because there's a difference. They're not so, the problem I see, and this is another opinion that I see with current medicine, are doctors really two things: defensive medicine, like we talked about last week. They overprescribe all these things. They want a million tests and to legitimize their diagnoses. And then the other part of that is they don't know how to diagnose because they're used to checking boxes that tell them what something is. My uncle told me that when he left Emory University, he decided that he wanted, I forgot where he went to practice. I want to say it was North Carolina. He went somewhere to practice for a little bit just so he could learn to diagnose better. And he spent 2 or 3 years there, and then became a plastic surgeon and opened up 3 clinics in Utah, LA, and Las Vegas. So that changed that whole story. But he said that that's why he went to that other location, was because he felt like he did not know how to diagnose well. And he had to go someplace to learn that, because where he was going to school, he wasn't learning that the way he needed to. So it's pretty interesting. And he became a specialist. He actually worked with burn patients more than anything. So that was pretty interesting for me. So, all right. Let's see what we're doing on. Shoot. Are you there? Oh. Yeah, go for it. I think that's pretty valid. I think a lot of times, depending on the school, for example, here at ETSU, I think they do a really good job at searching for people who want to be general practitioners and providing for rural community care. So I think we get a lot of good students from that. But I think people also go to universities based on the type of specialties that are available. I think a lot of them, for example, when my uncle was shopping around for schools to become a plastic surgeon, the Medical College of Georgia was offering a specialization in burns because they were opening up a new burn unit in Augusta. And so he chose that because that's what he wanted to focus on. Another friend of mine whose son's he's a what is he doing now? He is a specific type of brain surgeon. I can't remember what his subspecialty is, but he went to I can't think of the university he went to now, but he chose that university just based specifically on that program. And so I think it's two-sided now. Think about in high school, though. I think people in high school now are asked specifically, what do you want to do in after college? And there's no real allowance for people to really kind of see what they want to do. And personally, I think this is totally off subject, but I think that not everybody is cut out for college. I think there's a lot of people who would really greatly benefit from learning a trade and really struggle through college, and then they don't know what to do. They end up with some degree that really doesn't mean much to them, and they don't end up working in it because they chose the wrong career path. I'll tell you this. I have a friend of mine, Robert, who is a specialty welder, works for GE, I may have already, did I tell you that already? No, I've only been here one class. Yeah, he works for GE. Went to 1 year of specialty training to learn how to weld a specific way. And Robert makes about $60,000 a year more than I do.
Serious?
Mm-hmm. Sure does. Now he works about 70 hours a week, and that's with his overtime. But Robert's doing okay for a year of education after high school.
Seems perfectly fine.
He made a really wise choice. That is a fantastic return on investment.
And his student loans are pretty low.
He has no student loans. Robert has no student loans. In fact, I think Robert's student loans were paid for by the state to go to that trade school. So, state of Tennessee took care of Robert.
Now, if
Underwater.
next week I have no students in class, I'm blaming you.
And we'll know they were in it for the wrong reasons. Yeah, it's my fault. Oh yeah, it's crazy. He does. So when I worked for Alstom, we made nuclear turbines, and the type of turbines that we made, we would cut from 5 different discs and would weld these discs together. And so you can imagine the tolerances that when you're spinning these things at 30,000 RPMs, and they're inside a nuclear, service station. It's kind of important to not have a, one of your little wings fly off at 30,000 RPMs and shoot through the concrete wall. So tolerances have to be really good. Welds have to be really tight. And so, learning how to do that was a really smart idea for him. And he had to be willing to say, I will go to work wherever. So he's been to Germany. He's been to, Alstom was the original company. And so that's a French company. So he's been all over the world and willing to make those sacrifices, but it's paid off. So anyway, okay, another tangent. So community health and public health. Where do these fit into this whole dynamic? So remember, we've gone from this system, or not a system, right? Where we have had almshouses and pest houses. We have state-run mental care, if you want to call it that. Where did community mental health fit into any of this? And what was public health's purpose in all of this? Was there any such thing like that? Not really, right? And so the whole formation of community mental health didn't really roll around until the 1960s. And, excuse me, as you think about some of the things that occurred because of the need of reform in mental health care, the first thing that really had an impact was the fact that the federal government got involved. And you think about one of the biggest things that, and the biggest issues with the formation of a centralized system of care is that we didn't have, and we still don't have, a truly central oversight over our healthcare program. Okay? Good or bad? I have my own opinions, but I will say that because we've not had this central idea, you still have this fragmented look at how we're going to take care of people that have mental health issues. So think about the different states, okay? And we're looking at 1960, right? So 1960, it's even before me, right? So 1960, you're thinking that the world is a lot different than it is now, and the way people look at those that have mental health issues. Do we think that they're at the forefront of society? We're not even really thinking about these people, right? Remember, we've placed these people in asylums for years. And so as we've placed them in asylums, we've forgotten about a lot of them. We don't want to think about that. That's just kind of let's just keep it quiet, right? We don't know how they're being handled. The state's got a little bit of money. We're throwing it that way. And so it became such a big issue when federal funding was finally made available, late 40s. People started focusing on this and saying, hey, we need to maybe look at this. How these people are being treated? How are these people, are they receiving any care? Or are they just being offloaded and dumped into a location? The National Institute of Mental Health was formed in '49. And basically, they wanted people to understand what mental health really is. You think about those of us who have family and friends who suffer from some type of mental illness. You feel really helpless in helping them, and there's so little that we understand about it now. We're in the 21st century, so in the 20th century, to think about these things and not have any assistance was really hard, and people really didn't want to talk about it because they thought truly that there was something wrong with you. And so having an organization formed to help people understand that was a pretty big help. So a few years later, the Mental Health Study Act passed. That was in '55. And basically it was through a nationwide study of mental health and how those problems were related. And in 1960, there was the Joint Commission on Mental Health, which produced a comprehensive report called the Action for Mental Health. And that's when JFK said, look, we're going to make a change here. We're going to change from institutionalized care, and we're going to start talking about community-based services. And so if you think about from 70 to 2002, the total number of psychiatric hospital beds, they dropped from 207 beds per 100,000 population to just 20. Now, you look at the population of the United States and you think that didn't have an impact. That had a huge impact. Does that mean they solved all those problems? Not necessarily. We didn't necessarily have all those problems solved, but we were taking a different approach, which led to where we are now. We started getting involved in more drug trials. They started to try to understand what was going on in the brain a little more. My hat goes off to those. We have 2 clinical psychologists within our hospital, and they do a lot of good, just helping rehab patients understand what's going on. I mean, you think about a rehab hospital, especially with those who've dealt with stroke, dealt with amputation, getting past that corner and understanding that, this is not the end of life. We live in a great time in medicine and a great country for this, where we can help you have a full life that won't be limited so much by your conditions. It's pretty incredible the way these mental health experts are able to help people out. So public health, their primary job was dealing with outbreaks, focus on social justice, and it was kept separate from private practice, right? Does that seem any different from now? Nope, not a whole lot of inroads made between those two. Do you think that's good or bad? Total opinion, yeah. Can you say there's some good on both sides? Maybe some bad on both sides? Sometimes I think the problem with this is that all the money is over here on the medicine side, and all the work is going on over here in the public health side, and all this work of trying to help with, you know, outbreaks and social justice that, you know, for those who don't have the funds, you know, to go have, you know, burns repaired because they have bad, severe scarring, and so the mental side of that, having those scars repaired, what that would do for somebody's self-esteem, for example. You know, there's all kinds of social justice things that where do you draw lines, right? And so there's definitely some inequality between the two sides. Workers' compensation. So about 1914, how did that come about? Any ideas? So think about this. Can you imagine going to work someplace, and while you're working, okay, we'll talk about a friend of mine that we call Nubs for a reason. So he's a steel worker, and they're working in a large metal shaft, and power goes out, auxiliary power, backup power goes out as well. And so this enormous metal beam comes crashing down, and he steps back, puts his hands on a concrete slab, can't see very well, and it lands right on the tops of his hands, right? Okay? He's got a great sense of humor about it, by the way. So it actually hit him across here. So it took the end of his thumb off, the last two joints, basically, of the index finger and the last joint of his middle finger off. Okay, perfect shot. And it's pretty remarkable what the human body can do, by the way. His hand retracted here. He actually looks like he has a thumb with no thumbnail, because his hand, the muscle in his hand backed off here, so he has an opposable thumb still. Pretty crazy. But he, imagine having that happen, and the foreman says, "You can't work. I'll replace you with somebody else. You're out of a job." That's what happened prior to having workers' compensation. You were not guaranteed to keep your job. You get injured on the job, it's the employer's fault, not your fault. He wasn't doing anything wrong, he was doing his job. Both the power and the backup power, they're holding that beam, went out. He couldn't help it, he's stuck in a big metal shaft. Loses his livelihood, basically. And imagine his boss saying, "We'll have you replaced tomorrow. Good luck to you and your family," right? So workers' compensation came into play to help those and protect those individuals. It protects you, protects me. From a risk standpoint, that keeps me very well employed, because that's one of my jobs, is to make sure the hospital's a safe place. Make sure that we're not exposing ourselves to an unneeded amount of risk in the workplace. So I don't want my employees to be injured, right? What happens if they're injured? Costs money, not just to take care of them, but not just because I'm going to get sued, right? It costs me money, though. I have to retrain somebody to fill that spot while they're out. But to guarantee somebody's spot, that means a lot, right? Does that go a lot towards peace of mind? Now, some people can't come back to work, right? Happens. And it's bad when it happens. But at least the workers' compensation is in place to help protect them and take care of them if something does happen. Okay?
So I have a question.
Sure.
That means if they can't work, so they are just paying some money for compensation.
Can be, yeah.
You have to train someone else to replace them.
Correct. Yeah, depending on the circumstances. For example, depending on, so say you are injured beyond the return to work. your physician says there's no way you're ever going to return to work. Okay, there's lots of little things that occur. Okay, I'm not going to go through every step of, you're going to file a workers' compensation claim against the organization, right? You're going to have your own attorney appointed to you by whoever you select, who is probably a workers' compensation attorney, who is a specialist, you know, because we have specialists in law now. And he's going to come to want to request all of our documentation of what happened, take a statement from you, you're going to tell all about what happened, and you're going to file a lawsuit against the location, and then we're going to try to say that, well, here's what happened, here's all of our documentation. We're probably not going to deny that you got injured, probably not going to deny anything, but we'll probably say, what are we going to settle for? You know, I mean, truly that's what'll happen. It'll probably settle out. It's very rare they go to court. They settle out of court for the legitimate cases, and you know, whatever your settlement is whatever it is. If it's something that prevents you from having a good active lifestyle, I'm sure you'll be well compensated for it. So this is not my advocacy to go out and file a bunch of workers' compensation claims against your organizations, okay? It's a very, that is the Ryan Youngblood 2-minute synopsis of what will take probably months, if not years. Okay?
What happens in between the years?
Don't know.
Bankruptcy?
Possibly.
America is a harsh place.
You know, there's all kinds of things that can, I don't know. I can't talk to any individual case. Everything is so different. You know, you think about it. You know, in the case of Jason, he when he lost those fingers, they said, well, here's how much each finger's worth.
What?
True story. Insurance company said, this is how much your fingers are worth, and you can come back to work. He came back to work. He works fine. Okay, we make accommodations. At Alstom, we made accommodations for him. It didn't happen at Alstom, but we made accommodations when he came into work. We knew he had these limitations, and so he did the work. He's still a steel worker. Yeah. In fact, he when we built the factory, we built it from ground up. Built the factory. I remember the first time I met him, he's up at the top, almost the top. They're putting a brand new 500-ton, which is a crane that would lift 500 tons. So we're talking 1 million pounds. Putting this in place, he's up on this big metal rail roped off. That was the first time I ever met the guy. Super nice guy from Indiana.
If they have a quick question, if they purposely hurt themselves,
That's a totally different story.
okay.
Totally
We saw
different.
that a lot at the hospital that I worked at.
Yeah.
We had a transvac system, and people would intentionally put their hands in it, and then the door would come down on them
You know,
intentionally. So then they would get the time off. But I know when I started, there was a guy that, I don't know if he got the money or what, but I know there was a lot of drama with it.
yeah, and then your risk department looks at those and goes, okay, what do we need to make changes here?
Yeah.
Because if we have a rash of people who are purposely doing this, are we making it too easy for them to be able to do this? It's a huge headache. That's why you look at any organization, the administrative costs are already established because of this type of thing. And then you throw in all of healthcare, you know, it becomes an enormity. It's a hard place to be. You guys are picking a hard field, you know, go to trade school. See, just kidding. Don't do it. We need, seriously, we need good people in this.
You don't even have to go to trade school. You can just learn to repair dishwashers, and like they make money too.
Are you making a cut for dishwashers or something?
No, like not the person who
Right.
washes dishes.
I got you.
The
Yeah.
machine that washes dishes.
Wow.
So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, there's all kinds of crazy things. I mean, people will. I've heard stories. Never been in any location. People will lose fingers purposely because of money. You know, especially in industrial settings. So, workers' compensation is designed to be there to protect the employee. But as an employer, it's a real headache, and it's a huge headache. And it's a part of the world we live in. I mean, it's a great resource when used correctly. The problem is you have people who abuse the system
Yeah.
and it ruins it for everybody. It gives it a bad name, okay? You go to your human resources director and ask them what they think about workers' compensation claims. Okay, you're going to get an interesting answer.
Yeah.
Probably going to hear a few words that aren't going to come out of my mouth. All right,
Should we take a
that's
break?
what I was just about to ask. We should take a break. Anybody want to take a 10-minute break? All right, I need one. And he's got to have some chips. All right, online we'll be back at
What did you say? Someone set a table.
same 5:40.
That was hilarious.
Yeah.
You are an animal person.
I have become an animal person. I'm not a huge animal person, but my daughter loves animals.
Okay.
And so we've acquired 3 rabbits, a dog, and a cat, and I'm sure by summer the chickens will be going. And
Good one.
What kind of chickens do you have?
we don't have them yet. We're getting them in March.
What kind of chickens are you getting?
We're researching right now. You got any specifics I should get?
She knows that.
I don't know everything.
Okay, well,
She knows.
I don't know. I mean, like, do you want eggs?
Yeah.
Do you want colored eggs?
we will take eggs that we can eat.
You can get-
Yeah, I have a 16-year-old who eats like 4 eggs every morning with breakfast. So.
Aricanas, they lay like green and blue and pink. But
Yeah.
if you want brown eggs, like Rhode Island.
Rhode Island? Okay. I've heard that. So
No, they take a little bit of time.
to get acclimated and all that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Let's
just
talk
lots of
offline.
time.
Yeah, we'll talk chickens offline. Good. Get back to the whole community health thing.
Chickens are community health.
They are. That's what I'm saying. We'll get back to the whole community health thing. I'm all about having my own food. So,
Our own non-processed chicken.
exactly. All right. So, health insurance. We haven't even talked about health insurance, right?
Mhm.
You think about health insurance in the 1800s. Did it exist? Not really. Not as something that people really thought about, right? I mean, insurance as a whole was probably just coming around late 1800s, right? So as need for medicine comes into place, people started realizing that, first of all, it was getting costly. Technology was coming into play, right? All of a sudden, vaccinations coming around, people are getting healthier, they're living longer, different procedures are happening. We're coming up with specialists now, right? We got doctors who are going to graduate school to learn. They're no longer expecting to get paid by chickens, right? They're expecting to make a living off of this, right? So, as this rise occurred, about 1911, started having blanket policies pop up, right? So what was blanket policy? I know you're cold, so I'm just kidding. Blanket policy, right? Anybody recall what a blanket policy is?
It covers like hospitalizations.
Yeah, it just kind of covers everything, right? We'll pay a little bit in, and you're gonna get, we'll cover the majority of your problems. And so, if you think about, as people started getting sicker, needs occur, more need was there. People were working at their jobs, and their job would say, have our own doctor, and they're going to take care of you. You get sick, they'll take care of you and your family. It's a pretty good deal, right? So think about some of those industrial populations. That was where a lot of that blanket policy came into play, right? We're going to cover your accident work. You get sick, got you covered. And then, if you need somebody to just take care of the, scrape your knee type thing, right? All that stuff's covered. Same physician, usually covered by the location's physician. All right. So this first really came into play with railroad industry and some other industries, because think about being able to keep their people healthy and keep them on site. But it was, when you thought about voluntary, those people who weren't in a medical, in an industrial setting where they needed to be kept on the job, think about whether or not they would be buying in and buying their own insurance. Probably not, right? So in 29, anybody know what happened in 1929? Stock market crash, which led to what? Great Depression. So I have no idea what that was. Sorry.
Please say loud.
My English teacher used to say that in high school all the time.
What do you say?
Death.
Yeah, fine.
Sorry.
Yeah, that'll do it. So think about the Great Depression. It was the funniest discussion on the Great Depression I think we've ever had. But instead of, where did most hospitals receive money prior to this, by the way?
From your patients?
Most of them.
Not at all.
Yeah, think about most of your community hospitals received it from donations. They're not-for-profit organizations. And so Great Depression happens. People have money to donate? No. So it makes it really, really hard to support your patients in need without any money, right? Remember, at this point, you think about the things that are occurring. Lots of development up to this point had occurred in the technology within healthcare. We were starting to see understanding about sanitation was starting to become more understood. Some vaccinations were really starting to come to light, and so there was some expense involved. And so to protect people, they came up with what was called a blueprint, came out by Justin F. Kimball. It was a hospital plan for basically to cover public school teachers in Dallas, Texas. And they called it the Baylor plan. And it was Baylor University Hospital in Dallas, Texas that enrolled over 1,200 teachers. Okay? And what these teachers did is they paid a whopping 50 cents a month. And for 50 cents a month, you could get 21 days of hospital care. Now, you're looking at a whole $6 a year, and you get 21 days of hospital care. That's a really good insurance plan.
I'd be going to the hospital for vacation.
If
A
you're
whole month of vacation.
during the depression, it's probably not a bad idea. Think about you're going to get fed, right? 50 cents a month, okay? And so basically what this became was the model. This was the model for the development of the modern Blue Cross system, okay? And so basically it was, what happened is other hospitals started offering these single hospital plans. So hospitals would offer a plan. Hey, you want to come to our hospital? 45 cents a month, we'll cover you. And we can cover up to this much of a population. And so that cropped up a bunch of independent hospitals. And it was great, right? It helped meet a need. And so what it was is basically development of a prepaid plan came later, okay? And so these fixed monthly payments. Okay, you got this prepaid plan. You're going to get this. It was the first time that there was a contractual agreement where it said that the provider has to provide all the services for this fixed fee. Okay, pretty awesome idea. So, how did this work? What was the total thought in this? How did the Baylor plan develop? Did they just say, you know what, let's get 1,200 people and we're going to just $6 a piece. We'll give them all the care they want for those 21 days. Do you think they just said that might work? No, they weighed it out, right? So this is how insurance works, right? They looked at a population of 1,200 teachers and they said, I wonder how often they're sick. Are they sick? You think all 1,200 of these teachers are going to be sick at once? What are the chances? So they weighed those out. This is a true risk analysis, okay? They're literally weighing the risk here, okay? And they said for 50 cents a month, for $6 a year, times 1,200 people, which is not a lot of money by today's standards, we can provide care for those people based on the fact that we know that not all 1,200 of these people are going to need 21 days of care every year. So insurance popped in place, right? That's how your insurance works. Okay? They look at a population and they say, we're going to provide insurance for this type of population. And so this is what we're willing to provide, the types of services, and it's going to cost you this much money because we know that we can make money on top of this. Okay? So when your insurance rates go up, what do you think the reasons are?
More sick people.
More sick people? Could be, right? And you also have increases in costs. So what they're doing is they're doing that risk analysis and they're looking at how can we still remain in business. Now, I am not saying that our insurance companies are just scraping by. A friend of mine, Alan O'Brien, I tried to get him for one of my classes. One of my really close friends is his brother. Alan O'Brien was the head of Aflac International. I was going to try to get him to just have a 10-minute. Let me record a 10-minute conversation about questions about insurance, because how they come up with those risk equations, I'd really like to better understand that. And he understands that really well, and Alan's doing really well for himself. Okay, so these guys are doing pretty well because they understand that idea. So when you look at the whole idea of incorporating a group into a plan, you have to look at those different ideas, okay? The different demographics. That's why they look at it, okay? That's why they look at demographics. Because they want to know, is this demographic more prone to this type of sickness? Whether we like it or not, they segment you. That's one of the biggest controversies that came out in the development of the Affordable Care Act is pre-existing conditions not being covered, right? Think about as an insurer, someone, as an organization, say I run an organization, is it in my best interest to say, bring all the sick people to me who I know have chronic illnesses and that are going to spend all their time in the hospital, and I'm going to keep their cost of their insurance down here. Just bring them on, right? That's not a really good business plan, okay? So keep that in mind when you consider what's going on in our environment. So if we think about the Baylor plan, okay, we had blanket policies, we got the Baylor plan that popped into place. So in 33, the first Blue Cross plan came into play, right? And so basically, these were a specific nonprofit. And when I say nonprofit, we're talking about they didn't share the profits with shareholders, okay? Okay, so there's the money that's gained, I'm not saying not for profit, and I think that's really important. I've had some students who had a really hard time wrapping their minds around the idea of a not-for-profit making money. Okay, not-for-profit organizations are some of the most well-endowed organizations in the world. It's what they do with those profits that's different. Okay, they have certain government requirements to do things with the money that they make. They can take the money and put it back into the organization. They can build more infrastructure with it. They have to do something with it, but it does not go to a shareholder. Okay, so keep that in mind. So there's not a specific board and a group of shareholders who are going to get a share of the profits. And so, you know, one of the reasons behind this establishment with this Blue Cross plan was it gave more. They thought it would give more autonomy to the physicians, because the physicians didn't have an investment in this. Because remember, Original Hospitals was a grouping of physicians who said, you know what, I can do this, you can do this, let's just put our stuff together and people come to us, right? All right, and that's an oversimplification, okay? But if you consider that all of a sudden they have an investment in keeping these hospitals moving, to move to a not-for-profit status means that the physicians could be more concerned about giving care, okay? Just want to make sure I'm covering the things correctly. So World War II shows up, right? And one of the biggest problems with World War II was the whole idea that Congress said, we're going to freeze wages. So as an organization, how do I get you to come work for me? If you aren't going to make any more money by coming to my organization, I can't increase somebody's wages to entice them to come here. And I can't give you a raise if you're currently working for me. What incentives are there to change, or to come to an organization, or make a change within an organization? Move up the ladder type things. You can move up and then get a higher increase, I guess, that way, but it was not the common practice. So what do you think employers did? Benefits, right? That's why we call them benefits, right? Yeah, so we're going to offer you insurance. And think about it. In lieu of wages, in addition to my low wages, I say, hey, I'm no longer going to charge you that 50 cents a month. Okay, I'm going to cover all your medical for you. And that becomes a pretty good benefit. So go off on another tangent. When I worked for Alstom, it's a French company, and because they have French insurance, they expect all of their employees to have similar insurance. French have ridiculous insurance, like super, you know, it's all supplemented by the government, so they supplemented my American insurance, and I was like, this is pretty good. My family and I had to have that surgery I told you about, right? Oh gosh, it's been longer than 7 years since I had that surgery. So I had this surgery, and my insurance cost me for my family of 6 with dental, vision, full health care, with my short-term, long-term disability, and up to $150,000 company covered life insurance, $35 a month. Pretty awesome, right? That's a benefit. That's where the company said, listen, this is how much we're going to cover for you. So how shocked was I when I left Alstom and I went to work for Grace Healthcare, and it was costing me $600 a month for my family, right? Because we were a small organization, and I didn't have the coverage that I had before. And so we were a small organization, and our pool of employees that were paying into this policy were much smaller. Instead of having the literal tens and tens of thousands of employees, we had, we're looking at maybe 2,000-3,000 employees across the whole system. And so it was expensive, right? That pool was smaller, that risk pool was smaller. And I worked in healthcare, and I'm working around sick people. right? And so the likelihood of me getting sick is higher, even though I at the time was a lot younger, and so it made it more expensive. But World War II, that's when that came into play, right? They said, hey, we're going to cover that. We got you back on this one. It's all right. And then in 48, the Supreme Court says, you know what? We're going to take care of this. We're not going to allow you to be taxed on your health insurance. Actually, that was 54. I jumped ahead. 48 was actually, see, I told you these dates. If I don't look at the written down date, I don't know. But you need to know that this happened, okay? But they said that in 48 is when they said that it could be a legitimate part of negotiations with your union. So union negotiations could come in and say, listen, as a union, we think you need to cover this part of our insurance. And so the Supreme Court says, yeah, that's legit. You're gonna have to do that. So I have these ridiculous slides up here. This is what politics portrays. I love these political cartoons because they make things look a specific way, right? And politicians, you think about how politics have messed with medicine as a whole. Some ways, by adding regulations, it's really been helpful. My life is all regulations. That's my job. My job is regulations, to know the regulations and know how to help the hospital maneuver through the regulations so we can get paid, right? And stay open. We just, pat myself on the back, we just finished our Joint Commission deemed status survey in November. Surveyor told us when she left that was the finest survey she's attended in her 20 plus years with the Joint Commission. And so I was like, thank you. Remember that in my evaluation. And so I actually wrote that in on my self-evaluation last week. But yeah, but it's really hard to maneuver these things, right? So pros and cons, they provide safety for the employee, they provide safety for the patient, but we're talking about a maze of things to go through. Are all the regulations necessary? Do we even know all the regulations? No, I don't know all the regulations. I know where to find them. I know how they're categorized. I know the ones that are most focused on. I listen to all the phone calls and all the conferences that tell what Medicare's new focus is, and that's what we start focusing on. And I learn something new literally every day about regulations because I can't know it all. It's like looking at the tax code, right? The thing's just thick. You can't know all the laws on the books. So some of the things may not be necessary. Some of them are, okay? But we start talking about national health insurance as part of the development of all of this, and you think of what's been going on, right? Why do we not have one? How did we get to where we're going? What do we truly want as Americans? Remember, how are we as Americans? Think about one of the reasons that it's not been a viable option. What are we as Americans? When you think of an American, what do you think of? Can't offend me. I are one, we are very self-involved, right? We are self-determined. We want to do things on our own. We don't want anybody to tell us how to do it. I think that's pretty accurate. People look at that and they go, love it or hate it, that's how we are as Americans. We do not want the government to tell us how to run things. Everybody's all in favor of helping someone out, but who in here wants their taxes to go up? Nobody, right? That's the thing. We're all about social justice, but I don't want to pay for it, right? And so we have to consider why we don't have national health insurance. That in itself is a telling idea. Are we truly concerned? Are there ways around it? Who knows? Are we going to get there? Who knows? Do I think we should? Don't ask. You don't want to know. We are American. Our system is American. It's truly American. If you want to make a system that's an American, that's what we've got, right? We have a bunch of different organized groups who make and establish different types of competition, because we love competition in this country. And I mean, we thrive on it. Everything we do is competition. I love competition. I do. You know, so go off on more tangents, right? Competition, the whole, even within our own hospital system. So we just renamed ourselves. January 1, Health South is no longer Health South. They're Encompass Health. About 2 years ago, they acquired a home health agency, one of the largest in the country, called Encompass Health, and they thought that moving the company to this entire idea of Encompass Health would be a better name for us, even though Health South is the number one rehabilitation system in the United States. I don't understand it, but evidently someone who makes a lot more money than me decided that was a great idea. I think the whole idea of being Health South and then having a lot of our hospitals and, you know, out west didn't appeal to a lot of the groups. So they probably got some focus group together and said, what do you think? Should they rename? And said, yeah, of course, rename, right? So now we're Encompass. So Encompass Health has all these hospitals, 127 hospitals. And if you go on to our portals, we have these dashboards. We compete, all 127 hospitals, we compete in patient satisfaction, who can have the lowest number of falls in a month. We compete in all these different metrics, clinical outcomes, like how many days can you keep, how few days can you keep a stroke patient in your hospital, get them completely healthy, return them home, and not have them go back to an acute care center. Who is the best at that? Well, I'll tell you who's the best. Right here in Johnson City, Tennessee. Quillen Rehabilitation Hospital. Number one in clinical outcomes in the United States of America. Pretty amazing, right here in your backyard, right? And it's competition. When we first came on board, we were 52nd, something like that. We were right middle of the road, 127 hospitals, right down towards the middle of the road. And all of us in the hospital said, what? There are other rehab hospitals, and we can compete against them. Oh, and they offer incentives if you do really well. I got 4 kids. I'm like, sign me up. Okay, so what can I do? You know, so we start looking at metrics and we start saying, what can we fix? So we develop action plans and we say, okay, we're going to fix this. And then we say, okay, we fix that. How do we maintain that? We got to maintain it. So you get this plate spinning here. You ever seen a guy spin plates? I'll show you a video if you haven't. It's pretty crazy. But this is what we do. We're spinning all these plates now. And we got them spinning pretty good. And so first week of January, they sent all of the leadership team in this big email. Mark Tarr, the CEO, sends us a big thank you, congratulating us on being the #1 hospital in the country. So that was pretty great, right? We were already the number 1 in the U.S., number 2 in the company for patient satisfaction, and now we got the best clinical outcomes too. But it's all because of competition, okay? Mm-hmm. So competition did some really good things. And so national health insurance is not what we wanted because of this, right? Where's the competition? Americans go, nope, no. We see what these other, and we hear all the horror stories, right? You know, we hear the horror stories about, they paint a picture of, you know, it's funny because last week when you watched the video, you know, we saw all these great benefits and some of the negatives, and when each country made a comparison to the United States, they all laughed. They used us as their propaganda to their own people of, you don't want an American system, right? Remember the people in Britain, they're like, no U.S. healthcare, right? So we do the same thing. We're like, no European healthcare, right? We do the same thing, you know? So we use all these tactics, but what's the best? We don't know. Have we ever tried any of that? We don't know. We're working it out, right? So in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt, he decided that he was going to, excuse me, he was going to say, we're going to do some social reform. And I'm going to say that we need compulsory health insurance. That's how that was one of the first things that came out towards a drive towards national health insurance. Okay? So in 15 states said, you know what? We are going to say, we're going to try to adopt certain structures that would allow us to have some type of an equitable system. The problem is World War I occurred right about that time. These 15 states were coming up with these ideas about national health insurance. And so remember the scare tactics, right? Germans had their own German social insurance. And so the picture was painted, we don't want that. That's what the Nazis have. Okay? Even though the Nazi party hadn't come up at that point. What was that? 33, roughly. That's what Germany's got. We don't want German insurance. So in 40, Franklin Roosevelt comes out and he says, you know what? We got all these different plans for national health insurance, and none of them passed. There was no consensus in the United States, right? But Truman was the first one to just come straight out and say, we need national health insurance. That's in 46. Did we get national health insurance in 46? Nope. 92. Anybody know what happened in 92? William Jefferson Clinton was elected, right? And he said, we are going to work towards a national health plan. Put his wife in charge. Here's your job. Go to work, right? Get us national health insurance. Do we have national health insurance? No. 2010 rolls around. Affordable Care Act put into place. It was another drive towards national health insurance. How's that worked out in 2018? A lot of it's being defunded. Affordable Care Act's probably going to disappear in a lot of ways. Some of the things that were there will probably stick around. Especially, I really like the idea of keeping this uninsurable, those who have pre-existing conditions. I think we've learned a lot from that. But how do we know that it was even going to work? You know, we're looking at 8 years. 8 years in governmental time, how long is that? You know, we may as well be, I mean, that's no time at all, you know? So, all the reasons behind it, you know, politicians, people are scared of it, right? We're scared of it. Am I scared of it? Yeah, a little bit. But will we get there? Remember I talked about having this idea, populations will change. This idea will diffuse through the population about the need of it, right? We're becoming a more educated society where we're starting to see health not as a luxury, but as a right. And so how do we take care of that right? Before we had a lot of dissimilarities in institutions. Now we've kind of ironed out a lot of those things. You know, you go back to one of the original slides, the ICD-10. Those types of things where now our diagnoses, in order to get repaid, those things have helped us get a long way with getting rid of the differences between hospitals. The competition between hospitals is really great. What does it do for the consumer? And we have to consider it that. It's a consumer product. If you know that Quillen Rehabilitation Hospital, big plug, is the #1 rehabilitation hospital, especially for stroke victims in the United States, are you gonna You hear that? Are you gonna find out your grandmother has a stroke and you're gonna take her somewhere else? Probably not. We don't charge anymore. We're not allowed to. Our biggest payer source is the federal government, Medicare. Now that's the funny thing about all this. You know, people talk about, you know, well, just have to raise the rate of your insurance. I mean, of your cost. So here's the thing: if you have insurance, I can say to you, it's going to cost you extra, unless we get you to sign it. For example, this procedure is going to cost you extra, and you agree to pay this extra amount that your insurance won't cover. Your insurance is going to say, no, we're not going to pay any more than this. Before you walk in the door, that discussion has already occurred. Okay. When your insurance company says they're going to, so you're sitting in the ER, right? They're verifying your insurance. When they check your insurance, they're having a conversation looking at what your limits are for your insurance already. And your insurance has already said, we're only going to pay this, this, and this. So a physician may say, by the way, this is a totally different lesson, but it'll help you think about these things in terms over the next few weeks. When a physician says he charges a one rate, insurance says we'll pay you this much, and you get the bill, what happens? You responsible for the extra? Not necessarily. Okay, you can, a physician knows that he's not going to get paid what the insurance is going to pay. They know that. And so that goes into what they call a bad debt pool. And if it's legitimate bad debt, they can resubmit it at the end of the year. Most hospitals do this. They resubmit at the end of the year, and they get a certain percentage back from the federal government for their bad debt. That's how most hospitals get back into the black from being in the red. Most hospitals operate throughout the year in the red. It's expensive business. So bad debts, call it bad debt, but bad debt's good debt, because you're going to get paid back if it's good bad debt. Okay. So insurance companies, Medicare is the one that really determines what's going to get paid. They say we're going to pay this. Why, as an insurance company, why would I look over at Medicare and say they're getting this procedure for this price? Why would I let them charge us more? Especially when those are publicized rates. That'd be ridiculous of me to do that. I would not know how to run a business if I knew this information, right? So I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to pay you any more than Medicare is going to pay. So all these things that have to be considered. Total tangent again. But these dissimilarities have disappeared for the large part, okay? Ideological differences, we talked all about Americans, and we are very averse to taxes. Got to pay for it somehow, right? All right. Before 65, only private insurance is widely available. And so the development of Social Security Acts here, okay? So, anybody know what this first one is? Medicare, right? First one is Medicare. Second one's Medicaid. So Medicare, this is your Part A hospital insurance. Everybody know the differences in the different types of Medicare?
Don't worry, you will.
You will, yes. Okay, Medicare doesn't really discriminate. It's got certain criteria that you have to meet, but it's basically age related, right? Okay, and Part B is medical insurance. That's when you go to your doc, right? Not in the hospital. And let's see, this is where your physicians can balance the bill. That's what I was talking about earlier, okay? And there is a Part D. So I think I checked this link last night, it worked. We've had some problems with it in the past. If it doesn't work for you, let me know. I'll go find it and repost this link. This will let you know all the different parts, how they break out their cost structures. It's really detailed. I'm not going to go into every little part. Medicare alone could be its own course. You will know Medicare, Okay. Medicaid. What's the difference? What's the biggest difference between Medicare and Medicaid?
One's entirely federal and the other one's state federal, or I guess who they.
So which one's which?
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Yeah, so Medicare is federal, right?
Yeah, Medicaid.
Medicaid state.
And
So,
Medicaid.
and federal government says we're gonna give you some money to help supplement your state program, right? This one has criteria based on your income. And so it's gonna talk about your different classes of people. It has a stigma, right? People are like, oh, you receive Medicaid. Is Medicaid in Virginia different than Medicaid in Tennessee?
Yes.
Dramatically, right? And with this, physicians are going to get what they get. Okay? So, let's see. What can I drone on and on about? Not much. Think about the corporate era. How has big business changed? Not changed. How has big business influenced healthcare? It's an opinion. Okay? This is not your textbook necessarily, okay?
Big business.
What does big business do?
A lot of things behind the curtain.
True. How about, do we think that big businesses, as they've gotten their own physicians, have developed their own medical practices? They've developed their own ways of doing medicine, right? Big businesses looked at hospital systems and said, we can make a lot of money with this, right? Those days, the big heyday for medicine, it's not quite there like it used to be. Okay. You know, back in the day, physicians were getting big incentives from corporations. They were being influenced by drug companies, and so a lot of the problems people thought that were going on probably were really going on. In fact, even with my own organization, you want to look up some fun stuff. Look up Health South and Richard Scrushy. He was the CEO of Health South for a long time. Was sent to prison. Okay, for lots of different reasons. But corporate big business can be a problem for people because they get greedy. Okay, look up Richard Scrushy, seriously. At the time when all this was going on, I wasn't working for Health South. I was working for, I wasn't even in healthcare. And I was working in Birmingham, Alabama, of all places. That was where I had been assigned with the company I was with, and I was in sales. And when all this happened, there were streets that were named after Richard Scrushy Boulevard. His name was being popped off of signs. Anything that reflected this man was being taken down in that town. Okay, it was a pretty huge scandal. So this is what big business had a big influence in healthcare. Some good things happened. Lots of money funneled into big healthcare, creating lots and lots of benefits. Problem was, those were not necessarily being channeled into research and development, but they were being channeled into those with deep pockets. Okay. The information revolution. Think about what information we have available now. Just from my standpoint, in my 43 years on this earth, going from a rotary phone as a kid Still remember my telephone number. And it took forever because we had all these 9s. It took forever to get around there, right? And now I carry a computer with more memory than what they used to get to the moon on my hand. That's pretty crazy to think about, right? And I can find any piece of information that may or may not be true right here, right? It scares me to death. You guys can't see this thing floating in front of me, but you probably think I'm crazy when I'm trying to grab it. So it's like a feather. Yeah. I just thought about that. I think I'm crazy out here grabbing. Like, man, he's on some serious medication. But all the information that's available, how has that changed healthcare? What was one of the technological advances that we talked about earlier?
EMR.
EMR, okay. Telemedicine. Imagine that. This is becoming pretty commonplace. One of the things that so I would go to the doctor a couple of months ago, and I sit down. Now, last year I ran almost 1,400 miles. And I thought, that's a lot of miles, right? And I feel like I'm a pretty healthy person. And I go to the doc, and they check my blood pressure. And my blood pressure was something like, oh gosh, what was it? It was 180 over 93. So for me, I was like, goodness gracious, what is going on, right? And he looked at me and says, that's not normal for you. What's going on? I was like, I don't know. I've never had my blood pressure that high. And so he says, here you go. Here's what I want you to do. And he says, I want you to go to the hospital. You guys have ask what type of device we had. I said, yes. And he gave me some information. I gave it to one of our nurses. She checked my blood pressure on the machine. It sent it straight over to him. So I did 3 readings. Come find out my blood pressure is a whopping 123 over 72, I think is what it was. So that's normal. That's pretty good. And so it made me feel better, right? But I did this. I didn't have to come back into his office. I was able to do it right there in the hospital and then send it to his office. I never had to worry about it. Now you got devices that you can, wear, and it tells you what? It tells you all your steps. It tells you your heart rate. It tells you blood pressure.
You can buy like EKG bands for Apple Watches now.
Yeah,
and send it straight to your doctor.
It's crazy. I would have never have thought of this, when I'm sitting there in 1979 as a 5-year-old watching the Brady Bunch, right? Crazy stuff. Okay, so information, and it's going to continue to get faster, right? Technology is getting faster and faster. And you think about the differences between the first iPhone. Anybody here own the first iPhone besides me? Okay, everybody's like, that thing? Yeah. So I had the first iPhone, and now I look at it and I'm like, gosh, what a brick, I had a bag phone, okay? This is crazy, right? So technology is advancing. Information is readily available. We get information about everything. If you come to my hospital, I can sit you down and show you the amount of data that we have so much data we don't even know what to do with it right now. I cannot analyze all of it. Okay, there's so much. I have to pick and choose what I want to use. Okay, so that's where we are, and it's going to get faster and faster, and it's going to get better and better. If we can truly use this information, it will benefit us. What about globalization? Have we become more of a global society?
Yes.
I mean, think about my grandfather finally seeing his first airplane, okay? So he sees his first airplane, and his little community of Armurchie, Georgia, outside of Rome, and he thinks, what is this? This is the craziest thing in the world, right? Now, I didn't think anything of it. My boss would call me, for example, he calls me one night, it was a Tuesday night, and says, Ryan, I really need you in Bogota, Colombia tomorrow morning. I'm like, okay. So I go make a phone call to the travel agent, book a red-eye flight, 7 o'clock the next morning, I'm in Bogota, Colombia. Don't even think anything of it. Okay? I just gotta make sure I got a good passport with me, right? But the world is becoming smaller. I can pick up my phone right now and call friends in Spain. no problems. Not a problem. The world is tiny, okay? It's not like it used to be. Now we have to consider things like pandemics. We have all these considerations to take into our lives because now we have to think about more than just our little Johnson City, Tennessee, right? We have to think about those areas that come in, those people that are coming into our country and those people that are going out of our country, and what are they bringing, and what are we doing to prepare ourselves for these things? How do we help those countries so that when they come here, they don't affect our society? So globalization is a huge consideration. Does it come at a cost? Absolutely. Both emotional, physical, and financial. Okay, those things are things that we have to consider, though. We can't just hide. It's not going to go away. Okay, we can't hide at all. We can't think that someone else is going to fix the problem, or that because we live in some remote area of the United States that it can't affect us. Okay, it's going to affect anything that can affect a person will affect a person in this world. It's true. Literally, the butterfly effect has never been so notable. Okay. All right. Really quickly, there were two plans that led up to the Affordable Care Act. I think this is really important to understand. The Oregon Health Plan, the Massachusetts Plan. There's some distinctions between the two about compulsory payment. I want you just to know that these were the main two plans that were looked at in development of the Affordable Care Act. Okay. All right. So, the Affordable Care Act happened in 2010. We know that it was based on two plans. 12. Remember, think about how they talked about this. This was the worst thing to happen in the United States ever. Supreme Court said, no, it's not. It's constitutional to make people, require people to buy insurance if it's going to take care of them. If you're going to require people in a state to buy their own car insurance to keep people safe, it only makes sense to require them to buy their own health insurance so that other people aren't having to pay for that too. But they said that Medicaid expansion didn't have to occur. So states still could opt out to the expansion. Do we know what Tennessee did? Tennessee said, we don't need it. We don't need the expansion. And so that's one of the big differences. That additional federal funding towards Medicaid didn't happen, right? So do you think people, this is the dumbest question I'm going to ask all semester. You think people in the United States all rallied around the Affordable Care Act? Everybody finally said, it's the law of the land, we love it. We're going to take it and we're going to, no, right? I said, what happened? Donald Trump was elected on one of his main reasons for him being elected. He talked about, I am going to repeal and replace, right? So, Affordable Care Act will be no more. I'm going to eliminate it. And the American people said, okay. Okay? It's never been funded well. Immediately, Congress said, you got a Republican Congress who says, nope, you can put the law on the books, but we don't have to fund it all. And they did that. They said, we're not going to do it. Now, a lot of the promised results that were out there never even happened. And a lot of, have you guys read it? It's abysmal, I'll tell you. I had to read it for my master's. Oh my gosh, it was the longest read of my life. There's so much pork in that thing. They filled it full of stuff that didn't have anything to do with it. That's what they call it, pork, right? They throw a bunch of extra stuff in there for politicians to join in. Hey, if I put this in here, we're going to give $10,000 so you can take care of the local auditors in your communities. Yeah, okay, well, I'll do it just because you said that. All right, so the next thing you know, they get a vote. Seriously, that's how this thing was passed. And it's full of that. It was the worst read of my life. It was in my law class. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. And they didn't even read it before they passed it. They didn't. Nancy Pelosi's remark was, we need to pass it so that we can know what's in it. You guys never heard that? Oh my gosh. Yeah, so nobody knew. And they put it into place and nobody knew. So of course, a lot of those promises never came into effect, right? But was it a step in the right direction? It really made us think about healthcare. It made us think about what our needs are in this country, right? I think ultimately a lot of good will come out of this. It's made my life really difficult, but it's made my job really legitimate. So how do I knock that, right? I forgot the name of the principle, but it talks about bureaucracy, how bureaucracy creates its own need. I'll find that. There's an actual equation that helps you total up how large a bureaucracy will become based on what it is. Anyway, I'll look that up and bring it to class sometime. But sometimes I wonder if this is what we're doing. Other times I think, are we finally meeting a great need, right? It has become cumbersome in a lot of ways. It's hard to maneuver. It's really sluggish. So many approvals that you have to go through in order to get someone the care that they need, especially when you're dealing in rehab situations. And it never had that great public support, okay? When you don't have public support, you would think we're still, what do we say, 1912? No, roughly 1910. When they first started talking about national health, some type of national health coverage, and we're looking at over 100 years later, still public support's not there, okay? It's just not there. Right or wrong, it's just not there. All right, any questions for me? You exhausted? I mean, I'm running on cough drops and water here. So. All right, that's all I got. Do your quizzes, okay? I'm going to make this plug. This is not the time to say, it's not that many points. I won't miss them. Okay? Take full advantage. Read the information. Do the quizzes. Get them in on time. Get the points. It's like a freebie. It's like us saying, here's some extra points towards your A. Okay? Just do it. Okay?
Don't forget your first homework's due when?
Have a great week.
Yes, it's based on the video.
Because all the topics
Stay
are class
sick
activity.
free.